want to tell you the story of Adam and Eve. God placed Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden to till it and to keep it. God invited them to be partners in creation, of bringing life from the soil the way that God had brought them to life from that very same soil. And their relationship was so close to one another. God gave them everything that they needed. I mean, sure, God set some boundaries the way that, when parents are cooking in the kitchen with their children, they'll let them touch and dump everything, but don't touch the stove. There are boundaries for our own good. One time, when Eve was all alone, temptation crept in. Temptation crept in like a serpent, like a snake who slithers in silently, unseen, until all of a sudden you know that it's there. And we know temptation. Temptation is like that snake that gets its fangs, sinks them deep into us and doesn't let go. And so Eve, she tried. She said, in her mind, she said, God said, don't eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. She looked at the fruit and it looked so good, so delicious. And so she said it out loud. God said, don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, or even touch it. She had to repeat it again. It was so hard. God said not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Don't even touch it or you will die. And he even started putting words in God's mouth. Words that God had never even said. It just didn't make sense. She knew God. She knew that God wouldn't kill her for eating this fruit. And so maybe if she tried it, then she'd know for sure. Then she'd know for herself. Man, besides, maybe God was just being overprotective. And so Eve tried it. She ate some of that fruit and she gave some to Adam, who thoughtlessly, didn't without any question, ate it. And immediately, both of them were ashamed. They were ashamed of themselves. They felt so exposed. They felt as if they were naked, naked in their body, naked in their minds, naked in their hearts. And so they tried to cover it up. They sewed some fig leaves as if that could hide their feelings of shame. When God was walking through creation, as God always did, they hid from God. And they thought they were so crafty, as if God wouldn't notice that they were ashamed, but God knew it right away. God was so sad for them. God was so sad that they felt like they needed to hide, that they were worried that maybe God wouldn't love them anymore. This story isn't about breaking rules. It's not about making God so angry that it needs to be satisfied somehow. This is a story about Adam and Eve acting like a bunch of teenagers who are trying to figure out who they are, getting secretive and distant from the parent that loves them so much. Everything that happens to Adam and Eve after this point is not some divine punishment. It's the consequences of their actions. If you think about it, God's very presence, God's loving words, God's loving actions, each and every one of them is like a stab in their heart because they know they've betrayed God. Everything that had been a joy before is a burden now. They're at odds with creation. Before, they were in that Garden of Eden, tilling it and keeping it, but now they're plowing and toiling, and it's yielding thorns that wound them. God yearns for them to grow up, to come back again, to be reconciled. And so God works on that. God works behind the scenes. God works overtly. God tells them of grace and love. And God does what they will allow God to do. I mean, God at least manages to make them some suitable clothing. But God doesn't erase their mistakes. Instead, what God does is empower them and make it possible for them to live in spite of them. This is what God did for Adam and Eve. That's what God does for us. It's what God does in each and every story of the Bible, including the story of Cain and Abel, which I look forward to sharing with you tomorrow.